their experience clues us in on some of the things that are sort of happening in Poland. If they're happening in Poland, they're happening elsewhere. Uh, and one of those things is the very social sensitivity that women have, in particular, to what other women think and do with regards to fertility decision making. I mean, I've long thought that family size um, is only partly about sort of economic ability. It's far more about social sensitivity.
Professor Mark Regnerus, such a joy to talk to you again. You're a prolific author and you write in things which are very pertinent to the whole zeitgeist around sex and culture. It's really good to talk to you. There's a couple of things I wanted to talk to you about today. The first thing is about some evidence that you produced, some writings you produced not too long ago, which got hammered and has recently been exonerated as being actually valid and very significant. I wonder, first of all, say hi to us and then perhaps take us through exactly what that research was about.
It's good to be with you, Tony, as always. Uh, that new piece of evidence study, in some ways, took me by surprise. A friend of mine pointed it out to me. It appeared in a as a book chapter in a book on multiverse analysis, which I can't say that I'm an expert in. Barely know the foggiest about it, but I think what happened is that there's, in terms of computing speed and uh, the use of AI, especially the computing speed, we have an ability to evaluate other people's analyses if we have their data and if we have or can replicate their coding for the how they did this. And in this case, it was fair to say that my 2012 study on the adult children of parents who've been in same-sex relationships was controversial and caused a lot of uh, hubbub, furor uh, back in 2012 and probably lasted for a few years. I still see people talking about it, asking Grok questions on AI, which is hilarious.
Interesting.
So what happened is two professors at Cornell, whom I'm not familiar with personally, uh, they said, "Oh, we have access to his data because I made it public. They have replicated my coding. They have access to two key critics of the study, their coding. So they said, oh, this is perfect, right? What we can do is we can take those three sets of codes. We know the data, we have the data. We can analyze what they did in all the possible ways they could have done so with the variables they've used. And essentially, it's a really neat, nifty kind of comprehensive understanding of what somebody else has done in their analyses,
Mm.
and versus what it's possible to have done, right? I was, stunned at it. And my friend who had seen it told me about it, and I said, first I want to get the chapter quickly and take a look at it. But he said, "Oh, it's good news for you." They sort of think that, you know, you were as accurate as you perhaps you close to accurate as you could have been compared to your critics. I'm like, wow, really? Is that true? Uh, I remember the two critics, and I remember their analyses that came out in 2014, 2015, and I thought, they cut some corners. They overloaded the model, um, used a smaller sample. Anyways, I thought, those were problems, but nobody was listening to me back then. It's like I could have said, "Hey, this is a problem," and even the authors of this chapter said, "We believed the critics were right," and we were sort of surprised that our modeling of this with multiverse analysis revealed rather that in the majority of ways that you could do this, Regnerus's analysis is closer to the empirical truth with this data
Yep.
than the critics were.
Yep.
So, yeah, I felt I felt good about that. The thing is, what I didn't feel is sort of surprised because I knew that data, right? And I was not trying to lie with data. So it was not surprising to me that all the ways that they could analyze the data, they revealed that, hey, Rigneris is really not completely out to lunch. So that was neat to read. And they gave me a bit of a shout out for, and the critics, they poked at the critics for not first talking about the results in plain fashion, meaning crosstabs. What percent of that does this or says that? They criticize the two alternative analyses for skipping that part and kind of uh, only showing significance effects, which they could bleed significance by reducing the sample. And they reduced the sample by cutting out anybody they thought couldn't possibly be in this data set. So yeah, it was nice to see it, frankly.
Nobody talks about it. That's the problem. So people will talk about the criticism of your analysis, but nobody talks about the fact that the criticism has been proven to be incorrect and unfounded.
I'm not the kind to toot my own horn,
No,
so it was
no.
nice that
Well, that's what I'm for. So,
all
and I'm happy
fronts
to do that
went and
because
did it.
it's very because again, I think this is the one of the issues that we have in society is that uh, you know what who was it? One of the Shakespeare, my false outweighs your good. What was it? I can't remember. So one of the Benvolio or somebody else like that is the fact that it doesn't matter whether you're right and you're truthful. My false will outweigh what you're saying, and that's what we get. That what's broadcasted is criticism, undermining, duplicitous resampling until you get the results you want, and not acceptance of the actual broad data set, which points to the fact that actually it turns out it matters whether you grow up with your own biological mum and dad first of all, and or a male and female second of all. These things, it turns out, make a big difference in people's lives, and it's not hatred or phobia or anything else to say that we need the truth. Policy should be based on the truth. Children matter.
That article came out, the ch book chapter came out too late for me to talk about it, but I wrote a piece in First Things called "The Dirty Science"
Right.
back in the spring of this year,
Yeah.
kind of recounting that era from 2011
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
The whole experience, as you well know, kind of is discouraging in terms of how science proceeds. Um, I'm a big believer in sociology and in science, but I'm very tired of kind of hearing the same three notes played and throughout the social sciences. It's become somewhat of a boring discipline to me. Uh, and when it could actually be very interesting and very enlightening, but it's turned so politicized. I mean, it was never unpoliticized, but there was an era where you could divert from received conventions and consensuses and actually study something new and study something from a different angle and problematize some dominant norms and themes. And I learned the hard way that that really isn't possible right now, which is a shame.
But the stuff you've published and the stuff you've worked on, Mark, is profound and important stuff. And for anybody who hasn't seen your previous interviews with us, I'll link them so they can go and look at them because you do tackle the stuff that needs tackling and you do tackle it in an objective and fair way, which a lot of people don't. So well done.
Well, it's interesting to do it.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah,
there's puzzles out there,
yeah,
sociological puzzles.
yeah.
Dig in.
Is there any way back, do you think? I mean, is there any way to kind of unpick the mess of saying, look, here's my conclusion, now let's find the data instead of the other way around? How do we revert?
Well, I think so. There's in the United States, there's some recent developments where more conservative legislatures have decided they want to kind of force public universities to create entities, schools, departments that are a little bit more of um, in some ways, we could say free thinking, but to foster genuine diversity on campus among the faculty. I think those are generally positive developments. My colleagues are not fans of them at all. Partly because there's such a long-standing expectation that um, the dominant paradigm is both right and good. So we've seen problems with the right part. Um, they still hold that it's the best way to do things. And I think diversity on campus and in the faculty is good. Now that it does, since it's framed around politics, it still means it can lurch in one direction or another, and that politics somehow guides empirical truth, which I think is frustrating and problematic. But in general, I think it's opening the academy to people who would otherwise be shunned, who are talented and deserve a place.
We'll see where that goes. Now, you're also working on something else which is quite interesting, and we, all of us in the West, and most of the world, in fact, suffering from a demographic crisis. People not having enough children to replace the population. Generally speaking, we're looking at every generation is at least a third smaller than the previous generation, which has massive economic effects because, of course, the today's taxpayers pay for yesterday's pensioners and retirees. So massive problems in society are on the horizon. You've been doing some work around that because one of the assumptions is, well, it's religiosity. If we could get people back into church again, they'd start having more babies because religious people tend to have more babies. But you're looking at an example where that isn't the case. Tell us more about that.
I'm doing some interview work in Poland, which is historically quite a Catholic place. It is undergoing secularization. It's a little bit like Ireland, except not in such a bad straits yet as Ireland has come to be as a Catholic country. Uh, but the church in Poland is fairly conservative, has been. And so there's an understanding that, well, church teachings on marriage, family, sexuality, and use of contraception should remain fairly stable. So what are the people doing? And why is the country down to like 1.15 in fertility rate, which is unfathomably low? It's I kind of every once in a while I dial back to sort of the human impulse to reproduce. And I think, what is our problem,
Mm,
right?
mm.
We've interviewed 75 married men and women in Poland, all of whom are weekly mass goers. Most of them have more than 1.15 children, which is not surprising. Their experience clues us in on some of the things that are sort of happening in Poland. And if they're happening in Poland, they're happening elsewhere. Uh, and one of those things is the very social sensitivity that women have in particular to what other women think and do with regards to fertility decision making. I mean, I've long thought that family size is only partly about sort of economic ability. It's far more about social sensitivity. And so I'm thinking, wow, it can't all be like just
Mm.
sort of what the church is saying.
Yeah,
No, it's in what women think about each other
yeah.
and how they sort of both police each other and kind of discern, where the good life is.
Interesting.
So it really is quite sensitive to social perceptions. The same woman deposited in a sort of higher fertility parish uh, would think and act differently than a woman who is somewhere else in a much lower fertility parish. So there's definitely that. And we hear their stories about sort of the struggle they feel um, with peers. But it's more than that. Some of it's Polish specific. Poland has high uh, rates of C-sections. It has high rates of episiotomies performed on women. So a lot of them have a painful and problematic first birth experience, one way or the other. and they swear off having more children. Now, it doesn't mean they won't have more children, but they become much more anxious and skeptical of the process. So there's that. And this is despite the fact that the Polish government issues about 215 US dollars per month per child to parents of children.
So that's significant. I mean, that's quite a financial boost, isn't it?
It is. And their leave policy when you have a child is quite generous. I mean, women are often given uh, a year shareable with their husband leave. Where in the United States, it's in some ways we could say it's draconian. My own daughter had her first baby, let's see, about 4 months ago. She was a graduate student, and she was scheduled to teach a class starting 2 weeks later, and they expected her to teach the class,
Wow.
and she did. So, uh, and it doesn't strike us as like horrible, even though like to the Polish women, I like that's obscene, right? That's
Mm,
just crazy.
mm, mm.
Um, there's a much stronger inclination to use natural family planning prior to your first birth. After the first birth, a lot of them tell us that uh, their periods don't come back in predictable manners. They're worried about having a second child within like the first year after this first one is born. Too much. I mean, some of the mentality of like, oh, I can't handle this is socialized, right? Because we go back a few decades and then a few hundred years, and plenty of women had many children and they handled it. Were they happy? Perhaps not. But it was like this was the way the world was. And so that it was considered normal. And if something is considered normal, you can handle it, right? But if normal becomes so much less, so much different, you know, people think they can't handle that, right? And so there's a lot more wrestling over a second or third child in Poland than there certainly ever was 40, 50 years ago, including in the communist era, which is very interesting.
And you were making the point before we were recording that actually, although communism formally has the Communist Party has fallen from power, actual communists still remain, obviously, because they're the same people that were there not too many years ago, just a little bit older, and maybe that's having an effect.
Part of Poland's legacy is about how to live together peaceably with people who persecuted you, right? So
Mm,
it's not like they exiled the communists. The curious thing here is not just about sort of communism versus free market. There are critics still of how free the free market is. As if parents and grandparents of young people in Poland today and children look back at the communist era as being both bad and kind of, navigable, right? Especially that first decade after a free market opens, it's somewhat lawless. That was the case in Russia, it's the case in Poland, where you have to you went from like you had a guaranteed job and a guaranteed place to live to none of that. Good luck, go figure it out. And so I think that was very difficult for the mothers and fathers we interviewed. Their parents still have that in their head. So they think the rational response to what we experienced back in the 80s and 90s is to encourage your children not to have very many children themselves. So, um, unlike the myth where grandparents or the parents of young adults are saying, "Hey, when are we going to get some grandchildren?" That doesn't exist like it once did. There's this mentality now that um, one, two max. Beyond that, you're fools, and we can't endorse that. Like these are the grandparents who should be falling all over their grandchildren,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
have two grandchildren now and one on the way. It's all happened in the last 15 months. Man, bring them on.
Bring them
They're
on.
great,
Exactly,
right?
absolutely right. Bring them on. I
So
can't wait.
it's tough when your peers don't endorse it and your parents don't endorse it. Some of the stories we've heard about parents sort of tutting people about having a second or third child, let alone a fourth. That's just unthinkable.
Yeah, I mean you're very good at, so if I think of which of your many books, Cheap Sex, you had some solutions, some proposed solutions in there. What would your Do you have any proposed solutions? How do we change the zeitgeist almost, so you reverse the contagion from not having kids to, well, actually there's something wrong, if you're not having kids.
I was drafting part of this essay I'm working on. I said, there's no Wyszynski or Wojtyła anymore there. There's none of this sort of confident Catholic leadership plowing through difficulty. We can talk about why that is the case, but I think uh, the sort of the priestly scandal era finally did catch up with Poland later than it did in the United States. And so they're undergoing a fair amount of that in the last decade up to present. So I'd say and I could be wrong, but the Episcopal Conference of Poland is not at its zenith of confidence and strength and leadership. So I think what the church is perceived as being conservative in Poland, but I don't think that people hear it and are counseled in quite this, especially in the domain of family and child rearing. Um, I think they're counseled less well than we are in the United States. I mean, I hear more from the pulpit about these matters than I think the Poles do.
Good. Well, when is this work going to be published, do you think, Mark?
First, I have to submit it,
Okay.
and then it depends on if the editors take it and how
Yeah.
long how pokey they are in pushing it.
Yeah.
So the place I'm going to send it, they're not known for speed, so it could be another year, perhaps.
Good. Well, I look for you. You'll have thought it through much more by then. I look forward to reading it. Um, it's always profound talking to you. I'm so glad you were exonerated in what was some absolutely seminal research that you undertook a while ago now, and it really is still extant and perfectly valid, still used by people like Paul Sullins and other great colleagues of yours. So very well done. And I look forward to your work on fertility rates in Poland, not just there, but actually everywhere. Everyone needs to sort this out absolutely immediately, really. We don't know where we're going to go if we don't. Mark Regnerus, always a joy to talk. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Tony. Enjoyed it.